Okay, guys, welcome back. Today, I want to complete our description of requirements, functional, non-functional, review extra examples. Hopefully everyone submit the homework. The idea with the homework is to do kind of a quick survey about our understanding of the topic. The grader is going to take care of the homework. You can expect the homework to be graded kind of nicely. We are not going to be too strict with the grading, comparing with what is coming, because we understand it's kind of your first attempt. We expect some things to be there, things that we review here, but obviously, if you get correct your homework 100, that doesn't mean that your questions or your submission is 100% correct. We are just grading kind of global ideas. So it is highly probable that your homework is going to be kind of graded in a upper way, just checking that you understand key ideas, right? Now, moving forward with details, with what is coming later, and just to be sure that you can answer correctly exams questions or do your documents later in a correct way. Previously, we start talking about requirements. I received some questions and I would like to answer them quickly. Yeah. Number one, when you talk about functional, the key idea that I mentioned is they are going to be verbs. Be aware of the and that are connecting probably two verbs. That is something that you need to fix. But the and itself is not an error. Some of you asked me, I addressed this in the previous lecture, the and, the conjunctions in general, they are a red flag, but not an error per se. You need to ask yourself, this and is addressing two functionalities, two services, two actions, or is just one, and the conjunction is joining other ideas. Key ideas for the functional requirements is going to be these actions. Be careful when you put adjectives in the actions. Usually what you want to do, what you want to have as a requirement is something that do not have adjectives. Again, I am not giving you a rule. I am giving you an advice. Be careful about, just minutes ago, I reviewed one requirement and it's like, I want to log in into the system, but someone showed me the option. I want to quickly log into the system. And my mention was like, as a functional requirement, it's just good enough logging into the system because I want this authentication functionality. You do not need to mention quickly. Looks nice, right? But when you add the adjective quickly, you are creating a problem for yourself because that quickly there make the sentence not a requirement because you cannot test it or you cannot estimate or you can go to the direction of negotiation. What does it mean quickly in terms of login? Probably what you want to do if the speed is really important is to add another requirement that is non-functional regarding speed. And the speed, the performance, is going to impact not only the login, but maybe other process also. The performance is important. It's a separate requirement. So those are the kind of things that I recommend you to be careful. Remember, services, behaviors, or reactions. That is what you are doing. Now, something that we move forward to review was the non-functional. For the non-functional, usually they are going to be adjectives. Forget about the verbs. What you're going to have there most of the time, and again, is not a rule. I am not telling you that if you do not have an adjective, you do not have a non-functional. What I am telling you is what you're going to have usually is this idea of quality or constraint. For the qualities, it's usually common to find a word, an adjective that is going to define that quality. The constraints are going to be a little bit more open. But adjectives usually are going to point out non-functional requirements. If you think about quickly, fast, slow, performance, robustness, all the things that we covered previously, they are going to go to the classification of non-functional. But be careful. The fact that you have an adjective do not make immediately that statement a requirement. The only thing is suggest that it's not functional, but you need to review that is a requirement. For instance, talking about quickly, that cannot be a requirement. Doesn't matter the classification because it's ambiguous. But if you add numbers, it should be able to happen in less than 1 second. Okay, that is going to become a requirement, and the category is going to be non-functional. Make sense? Something that I haven't mentioned, something that I want to put in a picture for you. What I am showing you as examples, the things that we mentioned in the previous lecture. I want you to think about, we're talking about requirements, but the only thing that I show you in the examples, in the lines that I mentioned here quickly, usually go in the orange part. I am talking about this verb or this adjective, and sometimes I am talking about the actor. So I am talking about this moving the Pac-Man, moving the ghost, create the maze, things like that, logging into the system. I mentioned before, I am talking about kind of the title for a section in a book. However, the requirement itself, what we call a requirement, is not only those 2 words. It's not only that sentence, moving the ghost or moving the Pac-Man. The requirement itself is something that you're going to put there as a paragraph, as a couple of sentences, something that you need to put a context there. I am going to ask you to write the requirements now, next level. But my point is, I am not telling you that a requirement is only 2 or 3 words. I am showing you examples of ideas, titles of the section. That is the reason, because in the previous class, mentioning moving the ghost or moving the Pac-Man, the requirement is all the things that that sentence means, right? Moving the ghost in the Pac-Man is a requirement. And maybe I need to explain to you the full paragraph. Moving the ghost, the ghosts are moving in an intelligent way, and there are 4 different colors, and each color moving a different way in this particular process or intelligent approach. That is the requirement. So the full circle. And the full circle, something that if you haven't done yet, what's your homework, or is something that is going to continue being your homework this week, read a paper that I shared with you on Canvas. I shared with you a paper. We're going to discuss the paper here. Don't worry, it's something that is going to happen. But if you have started reading the paper, one of the things that you're going to find there is this idea of requirement engineering is a lot about communication. Your goal, remember what the customer wants, and this list of requirements that you are searching for is an effort for communicating this in a good way. Several of the things that we're reviewing, including the INVEST principles, we're taking care of good communication practices. There are more in the paper, but I want you to remember is a communication effort. The requirement itself is a well-formatted sentence. Format. We need to talk about format. We need to talk about templates. It's something that is coming. For now, what I am asking you is for a sentence that explains the things, even though we are starting with the titles, because the first thing that I want you to learn or to be able to do is to split your book in sections. And the next step is we can talk about the format in which those sections are going to have content. Make sense? If you think about something that for you is a requirement, ask yourself, this is the title for a section. I am going to be able to write 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences inside of this section. Because if you think about the title and you ask yourself about what is going to be the content of the section, and you found yourself that the content is going to be one line, or that even do not need content because the title is self-explained, probably that one is not a requirement. It's just one activity, one part of something else. Communication, remember? If you create a section and that section do not need an explanation, probably that one is not a section, it's just a sentence that should be in a different part. Makes sense? And this applies for both functional or non-functional. Too small is a common error that we make. Always review that your candidates for requirements are not too small. All the letters are important, but one in particular that I recommend you to check, it was in red previously, and I put this note today. They should not be too small. You can ask yourself about this section in the book. You can ask yourself about how many instructions do I need to program this. Whatever question works for you for identification of something that is too easy can be something that you can use to identify something that is an activity, not a requirement. And I am going to talk more about activities later. Clear? Good. So far, hopefully your homework, the one that you submitted, but if this was not the case, the next one that I am going to ask you to do, in this one, if you give me just titles, I am okay. My goal again was to kind of create this discussion about what do you consider a requirement, what do you submit. We did not show a format or any particular requirement there. It's just think about it, right? Next step, and something that I want you to consider because of my previous picture. When you think about requirements, if the requirement is a title and the title needs an explanation, what you submit, what you document is something like this, in which your document, the main title is the name of your project, the Pac-Man video game if you want. But then when you look down to the document, you're going to have some headers, the titles of your sections, right? Things that you put in bold. Those should be the title, literally, the name of your requirements. But always, for each of these titles, you're going to have a description. You're going to have sentences. You're going to have paragraphs. Your main concern should be that, as I mentioned before, an empty paragraph, a paragraph with nothing here, is not a requirement, or is a bad requirement. Your paragraphs, you are going to notice, it's a very common thing to do, a very good signal that if you are doing something like this, you are going to start needing bullets. Because you are going to notice that, okay, I am going to explain something. And the best way that I can explain that something is I need to establish different points, different steps, different activities. Professor, that is the way that you document requirements? Not, obviously not. We have templates and we have a process to follow. But right now, with the knowledge that you have, this is kind of the thing that is going to happen. The only thing that I am going to do here is to show you the template for doing this and templates for doing these things inside. But right now, my goal is that you understand that these titles are just the beginning of something more complex. So for instance, when we mention moving the ghost in the Pac-Man is a requirement, is the title of the requirement. The requirement itself is going to be to explain here somehow how exactly those ghosts are going to move. And I am not talking yet about the source code for that, because remember, these are requirements. These are for all the stakeholders. It's not the design of the software. I am not talking about a flowchart diagram yet, but I am talking about one way to explain how the different ghosts move that is clear to understand for everyone without technical knowledge. I am not going to go down to the level of variables and things like that, but I am going to go down to, okay, explain me. If this ghost is a person, if he's the blue, the pink one, and I am the orange one, and so on, it's like, explain me how we can move if we want to simulate here in the classroom that game. If this is the labyrinth, it's like, what I do. That is what we need to provide there. Clear. Your next homework. Hopefully your first homework, the one that you did today, looks more or less like this. If not, again, for today, for the first one, if what you submit was 5 bullets functional, 5 bullets not functional, so far, okay, it's a good starting point. Moving forward, those bullets should be titles, and the bullets are going to be inside of each of them to explain the details. Clear? Good. My examples that follow, the things that I am going to show you. What I am going to do now is to ask you for, this is correct or not, this is functional or not. I want to be sure that it's clear. What I am going to show you so far is use the title. I am going to assume that you know this content, or I am going to describe the content, but it's not going to be on the slide. Makes sense? So just showing you the title, describing myself here in the video, I am going to ask you functional or not, correct or not, etc. Clear? Something that you're going to notice in your documents when you create requirements. The same thing that happens when you write a paper. You propose your titles, your headings, and then you start writing content. You start explaining things. You're going to notice that sometimes you put an idea in this paragraph, but you're going to notice that idea is really something that should be in the next paragraph. That idea is something that is not related here, but with the other. Something that you need to be careful is when you create a paragraph that corresponds to one requirement, to one section, do not mix ideas that are really related with several things. I am talking about the Pac-Man and the ghost. Oh, let's explain here also the score, and let's explain here also the killing of the Pac-Man. Let's explain here the full video game. No, your goal is to split the full explanation in these different, independent, negotiable, valuable sections. And if you can test it and estimate it, that is the plus. Makes sense? Good. Examples. Section 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. For ideas. Remember, these ideas are, I am the customer, I am speaking with you, you are the engineers, I express my needs, you are the ones that need to create requirements, not me. 1, 2, 3, 4. They are requirements, or what can we do to make them requirements? And if they are requirements, they look like functional or non-functional. Let's start with the number 1, right? One by one. A system, taxes, federal, state.
It depends, and so it is 2 different requirements in a single requirement. So it needs to capture the federal and the state tax.
I agree with you. And let me just explain. There is an and. And again, this and is a red flag, right? Can you agree with me that the point is telling about capture something and capture something? This is an example in which the verb looks like it's the same verb. It's just capture. But if we do a review there, it's like you're asking me to capture 2 different things. Here is where we need to know the context. I am assuming that we all know the context here. And I am assuming that we all know that one federal and the state are kind of two different problems. Starting with the fact that there are two different graphical user interfaces to capture the information. And whatever is going to happen inside, the process of calculating things. So because it's different graphical user interfaces, it's a different process inside. The different cells are going to mix with other cells. Did we notice that something that will be recommended for the number one is that because we have this capture and capture, this could be one requirement, capture, and this could be a second requirement, also capture. Did you notice, can you agree with the idea of requirement number one, capture federal taxes, requirement number two, capture state taxes? Yeah.
What if there's a constraint that we require both of them at the same time, single click?
It doesn't matter. The point here, very good question. We are trying to define all the things that the system is able to do, but we are not defining in which order or in which combination. The only thing that we are doing is a list of all the things that the system is going to be able to do. For instance, going back to the Pacman, the only thing that I am defining with the requirements of the Pacman, if you remember, it should be able to have a maze. It should be able to have this ghost moving. It should be able to have the Pacman controlled by the keyboard. I am not mentioning that they are going to happen at the beginning, the maze, and then the ghost and the Pacman at the same time together. That is not mentioned. It could be, I mean, you know that is going to happen at the same time. But if I am talking about a different game in which the computer play and then the user play, like a chess game, I am defining that the computer should be able to move the black things and the user should be able to move other color, but I am not defining the order. This is not a flowchart diagram. Just give me the list of all the things that need to be done. Thinking about the implementation, I just need to define all the programming that is going to be done. I don't care right now if that programming is going to be one main and in a sequential order calling methods, or it's going to be threads, and each run method in the threads is going to be doing something that is not sequential but concurrent. I don't care about that part. Good. However, we are going to represent that later because it's important after we have the list of all the things, kind of connect the things and mention that they are going to be connected sequentially, or they are going to be connected concurrently, they are going to happen at the same time or not. We're going to specify that later, but at the beginning, first thing to do, all the list of all the different things that the system is able to do. So here, the idea is the system is going to be able to help me with the state taxes. The system is going to be able to help me with the federal taxes. I don't care right now if I am going to click some kind of radio or bottom or whatever, and I am going to start with the federal, and then I am going to continue with the states. Or if I need to select in a menu first the federals and then the states, I don't care about that yet. Clear? Okay, so example number one, could you agree with me, is not one requirement? If the question is that one is a requirement, the answer is no. Why not? That is not small. Why? It's two requirements. Okay, convert that to requirements, two requirements, and now everything is fine.
So the system must be able to capture the system, use a single button. In that case, will that be a single requirement?
For what? Again?
Let's say we have three buttons. One button is just to get the capture federal. One is just to get the state. Third one is to get both together at the same time. In that case, if I write, the button must be able to get both of them. That
be careful. Very good question. Number one, we do not put the trigger here. In the requirement, do not put that the trigger or the way that you start the process is by clicking something or selecting something. That should not be there. The only thing that we are searching for is the service functionality behavior. And that service functionality behavior is help me with the federal taxes, help me with the state taxes. I am not going to tell you yet, not as a requirement, how I am going to request those services, how I am going to access those functionalities. That trigger is going to be important, but not yet.
So assignment, like that form. I have a form on which there's a next button. So I've written a requirement that clicking the next button should get us to the next part of the form. Is that okay?
That is not a requirement. That is an activity. For the assignment is fine. We're going to put a circle there, like be careful with this. As I mentioned before, right now for the assignment, don't worry. But that in particular, if I grade it, number one, clicking the bottom is not a requirement. Click the bottom is something that we're going to define later as a trigger. It's the way that you access the functionality. So it should not be there in any place as a requirement.
What would be the right?
In the requirement, only describe the functionalities. So for instance, right now for this, the taxes, functionalities, 2, requirements, 2, state taxes, federal taxes, period. We do not mention if I access that with the menu or clicking a button, or if I access one first and the other later, or the 2 together sequentially. We do not mention that yet. The only thing that we care, the requirement is federal taxes, state taxes, done. So those are the 2 things that I need to implement in the system. Think about this. You are concerned about the methods that you are going to create, the functionalities, but you are not taking care yet who is going to call those methods. Like they are going to be called sequentially in the main, or they are going to be called, one is going to call the other. Use the services. 2 things. Good? Good. Yeah.
The actions accompanying the trigger are requirements.
Yes. Something that we're going to document for each requirement later. What I am trying you to do right now is the title. Later, we're going to move to the definition of the content of that title. And one of the things that we're going to add at the end, like the cherry in the cake, is extra information. And that extra information, one of the things is the triggers. This functionality, this requirement, who and how is going to request the functionality. And in that trigger, we're going to define if it's going to be a menu, if it's going to be a click, or if it's going to be another requirement calling this one, the cherry at the end. The first thing that I want you to identify is what is the requirement. Later, we add extra things around. Good? Great. So number 1, please, yeah.
So if you want to use a specific type of service, would that come under non-functional requirements? Like, for example, if I were to use a specific service to improve the performance of the system, would that come under?
Can you help me with the question in the chat? The difference between capturing both tables, which tables is still? Which one? Oh, the point is the context. Right now, the decision that I take, the reason because I split in 2 is because I am considering one thing, the state, and the other thing, the federal, like 2 different services, 2 different functionalities. Why I am considering that? My decision, remember, this is engineering, right? So engineering means that we are taking a decision that is based on the information that we have, in the previous knowledge that we have, and so on, but not necessarily is going to be the same for everyone. My decision, separating the taxes, and hopefully you agree with me, is number 1, to capture the forms for the taxes. You use a different form for the state and for the federal, which means in a system that we are going to need different graphical user interfaces. It's not kind of exactly the same with only extra fields or things like that. So I am considering that use the graphical user interface is going to be a work for 2 different people, 2 different interfaces. Moreover, it's not only the interface. I start with that, but then I am thinking that understanding the federal, like the equations that happen inside of that form, how the columns, you do the numbers and calculate another thing and another thing, you know what I am talking about, right? And in the other form, kind of, again, you fill things, but the 2 things that you take from here, or 3 things, or the column that you take from here, and you calculate another thing, it's kind of a different thing than this one. So if I ask the same person to do both, that person is not like, okay, I finished the federal, so doing the state is going to be easy. Or it's going to be just like inheritance from the previous one, and I just modify small things. My assumption is that you have done both. And when you finish one, it's not like, okay, the others are easy. It's like, okay, I finished one. Yes, now the next one. And the next one is a full new process. And really doesn't matter which one you start first, but it's a full new process. So with that knowledge, I am thinking like, okay, if I am going to do a piece of software for this, it's going to be two different pieces of software, really. Two different graphical interfaces, two different calculations inside, and maybe even two different submissions, because at the end, when I finish in the system, if I want to submit one or the other, are going to go at least to two different addresses or whatever. So thinking about all these differences, my decision as an engineer is like, okay, this cannot be one thing. These are going to be two things because I am going to have two people working in two different systems or part of the system. So even though it's just capture, I decide complex enough to be two things. It's all about context because on the one hand, I can agree with that it's the same service. However, going back to the context, if I have someone here that is an expert filing taxes in California, and I ask that person to help me with my taxes in Arizona, for that person in particular, the stakeholder is going to tell me it's not the same service. So I can help you with one, but not with the other. So if I have someone expert in the federal, maybe that someone is going to tell me, no, but I do not know about Arizona. So that means that it's not exactly the same service. But again, it's all about knowing the context. And it's a decision that you take with the customer or with the previous knowledge that you have. In this particular scenario, my assumption, something that I share with you is, for me, for the customer or the stakeholders in a project like that, filling one taxes and filling the others is not the same. And if you had done that before, maybe you agree with me, it's kind of not exactly the same. So that is the reason because I split into requirements. Remember, your goal always is to have something that is small. Always you try to have these small things. The only thing that you need to be careful is not too small. And if I think about these taxes, there are two different forms. Let's split in two. They are too small. The states are too small, or the federal are too small. And I am sure that you are going to agree with me, none of them are going to go in the direction of too small. We can keep them as two separate requirements. In fact, my advice is they are two different requirements. Good? These are the kind of discussion, these are the kind of questions that I want you to ask yourselves when you are doing a system, but also during your exam. This is the kind of questions that is going to ask you to answer yes or no there. And I prefer you to ask those questions to yourselves during your exam, not in an appeals later. Good? Second, remember that I am showing you mostly the title. Remember that I am showing you kind of the idea. Remember that I am the customer. The first thing that I notice in the number 2 is that it's kind of big compared with the others. Red flag. It could be okay. Maybe it's the title and a short explanation that I can reuse later. But use at the beginning, suspicious. Not bad, use suspicious, because professor, you tell us that you are showing titles, and that one looks like big for a title. I am not telling you that it's wrong. I am just telling you, be careful with those. Right? Yeah.
I think even this will be split up because system must provide the ability to merge two accounts records is the first requirement. That is, after that, where one account is for the same person with an incorrect social security number by allowing the user to click the incorrect. This particular is non-functional requirement because it's an action to there that is involved here, and make the account changes to the correct account and then delete the incorrect account. So again, you use a red flag here, it's an end. So that will be the correct account, change the correct account will be one requirement, and then delete the incorrect account will be the third requirement. So yeah, there are multiple requirements.
Okay, I like the point. There are multiple things there. Yes?
End of the day, it's a functional requirement.
I agree with you. Yeah, mostly. Let me explain the process. The process that you follow, hopefully everyone follows the same. Number one, when you have something like this that is kind of big, the first thing that you're going to look for is to split things, to separate the different parts, probably the different statement there, the different sentence. Clear? It is too big. And when you are going to locate this sentence one, now, what could happen? Base case scenario. You have several sentences. What if all those sentences are activities? What if you detect that this one is an activity, this one is an activity, this one is an activity, this one is an activity? For instance, you know what? The system should allow the user to write an email. Then the system should ask for a password. And after the user click here, the system should either allow the user to continue or show a message that the user is not authorized. Did you notice all the things that I mentioned? And did you notice that was like sentence number one, ask for an email. Sentence number two, ask for a password. Sentence number three, allow the user to click here. Sentence number four, if condition, things go okay, continue, else, show a message of error. That is a requirement or multiple requirements? What you are doing, hopefully, is sentence number one, asking for an email. Let's review the sentence one, asking for an email. Is a requirement or an activity? Did you notice that it's an activity? How do you know that it's an activity? Because you're asking me to put a text field. It's too small. It's an activity. Okay, sentence number one is an activity, asking for the email. What about the sentence number two, ask for the password? Following the same decision that we take before is another activity. What about this condition? Allow the user to click here. Really? Are you asking me to put a J bottom there? It's another activity. Something that you are going to do. Activity. What about the condition of if the email and the password, whatever? If you have a condition, if you have an if, remember, that was another thing that we mentioned as a red flag. Usually conditions are activities. Why? Conditions are if else are one instruction. This condition about if the password and the email, whatever, are in the database or match something, that is another activity. What about this show a message if they are wrong? Show a message. Requirement or activity? Show a message, one line, right? Okay, all the descriptions that I give you, it was a long paragraph. But did you notice that I give you 5 sentences and each of those 5 sentences are activities? You know what happened? That I give you the paragraph, the explanation, the description, instead of the title. What is the requirement here? What kind of title could you use for the explanation that I give you? Customer, your requirement is you want authentication. We call it authentication. So authentication could be the title, the name for the requirement. And I can reuse all the sentences that the user gives me as part of the description of my requirement. Did you notice the process? It was not just like, oh, you give me 5 things, 5 requirements. No, because those 5 are too small. You are the engineers. You know that those 5 easy to do things are really one, the authentication process. Obviously, for the authentication process was too easy to figure out. It's not always the same. It's your work to figure out if something is activity or not. And when you have several activities together, put a name to that. Maybe something general like authentication, but maybe not. Maybe have another name, or you need to invent the name, but call in one particular way the service, the functionality. Good? So going back to my example 2. What happened with the number 2? There are several sentences, right? Which of those sentences are activities? Which of those will be requirements? Do I have more than one requirement and therefore I need to split that or not?
System must provide to merge 2 accounts for 1 user should be the requirement.
I like that idea. Can you agree with that idea of merge 2 accounts look like that is going to be one requirement? That one is going to be one. I do not know if there are more, but the idea of merging 2 accounts is one thing that the system should be able to provide. So I like that one. You can stop there for one title. There are going to be more. I do not know. We need to continue reading. But that first statement is the title for one thing. What about the rest? Can you agree with me that line number 2, more or less, is kind of the explanation of the context of why I need to merge, la, la, la. So line number 2 is something that you can reuse later or at this point ignore. This click is kind of the activity that we are going to follow, and we are still in the same merge account.
Deleting the incorrect account is also not.
Can you agree that here, correct one and delete another? Do we agree that this idea of merge is basically update one and delete another? That is merge, right? I mean, 2 informations, one is going to disappear, but whatever was inside should description of the same. Automatically, blah, blah, blah. Can you agree with me that this one is like context? Information of
extra data about how to like condition. Conditions are activities. In fact, some activities there about lock the account, la, la, la. One, merge, and an explanation of the context and the process of merge. Clear? My paragraph, I am the customer. I am not giving you the requirement. I am giving you the ideas. What you do is to identify that my requirement is merge accounts. And then there is an explanation about what that is. 3.
The user should be able to enter his or her name.
This one is tricky.
Dialog will show up will be definitely be an activity, but the user entering the his or her name will definitely be a requirement because it's the user interacting with the application, so it will be a functional requirement. It would be.
One thing to this happening is I am not giving you a lot of context. What you are going to read in the paper is your responsibility is to ask questions to the customer. Because it's like we're talking right now and I am telling you, I need to capture the name of the user. Either you have the context of what kind of game we're doing, or you need to ask, right? But let's continue with that one. Yeah.
I'll just ask this.
I will agree with what you described, like my initial thought here, that one is an activity. Why? Show something for whatever, I don't care if you show a dialog to capture your name or your password or to select, I don't know. It's just a dialog box. Showing the dialog box is not really a service. Showing a dialog box is an activity, a step of the service. The question here is, why are you going to ask for that information? The question here is, I know that that one is an activity. It's just one part of something. And what is that something? Because when you have from the customer something that is too easy, something like that, I need to capture the name of the user. The question that you need to ask to the customer is, why? Tell me, what are you going to do with that information? Not because I want to question you, but I need to know that doing that, asking for the name, is something too easy to do. I am going to store that information in a variable, obviously, as we do. But tell me what I am going to do with that variable later. You need to ask because that variable is going to be local or global, static or not, in a Blackboard pattern or not, I mean, shared memory or not. I need to know what is going to happen with this. That one, number 3, it's an activity. And it's an activity, therefore not a requirement. That doesn't mean that you delete the line. That means that it's one line, and you need to find either a section that you already have in which you are going to put that line, or to create a new section that needs a new title for put that line and others. Imagine that this is part of the Pac-Man video game. The Pac-Man video game. I think they ask you for your name in some point. When? For what?
To display the score accordingly for which player has scored the highest score.
And for that, we can remember that one requirement that we told before regarding the Pac-Man is to keep the score. And there, this asking the name is just an activity for that particular requirement. The requirement is really to keep the score of the player, or maybe a table of the best score, whatever you're implementing here. And one activity in some point is going to be to ask the user for the name or the something to identify them. The requirement is not this. This is an activity in that particular requirement that we need to identify. Clear? Good. 4.
How small the task has to be for it to be active? How do we?
Good question. Usually 2 ideas. And this is kind of open to you. Idea number 1 is something that you can program, implement with a few lines of code. If yes, it's an activity. Second question, is something that you need 1 day or more to work, or is something that you can do in a couple of hours? You can think about time, hours versus days, or you can think about lines of code, depending on your experience and depending on the question itself. But when you have something that you can do in a couple of hours, something that you can do and it's just a few sentences, and you can quickly think about this is going to be 1 sentence, like asking for the name or asking for the email, password, clicking something, is 1 line, right? 1 object that you put in the graphical user interface, or 1 text field that should be filled. All those things, 1 line, a couple of lines, are activities, not requirement itself. Requirement should be a service, a functionality, a behavior, something that is more complex that use a few lines. But again, not too complex, because if it's too complex, several requirements, not 1. That is the balance that you need to find. Small, but not too small.
For example, Amazon website, add a new user. I would call it requirement.
Yes.
Out of certain.
You need to get the information from the user. I don't know how long is the information. Maybe you need social security numbers. Maybe you need only user password, names, addresses, blah, 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 blah. So it's going to be kind of a questionnaire to fill. And then you're going to do something with that information, maybe in a database, And then you are talking about two different things: a graphical user interface, transaction with the database, maybe a confirmation need to be sent, maybe an email or something else, or use a dialog box, 1, 2, 3 things. That is not going to be something that you do in a couple of hours. One developer in a couple of hours. Because you need to implement, you need to test and so on. That is a requirement, adding new users. Checkout, shopping, everything that is usually a full page, something that you need to do in a page or a couple of pages in a web, are going to be requirements, usually. Something that is just one line in the page, like ask for the email or click or submit, those are going to be activities. Again, there is not one way to know. There is not like a list of things to review. It's more like a decision that you do as an engineer, like this is easy or not, quickly or not, 1 hour or days, difficulty. And if you have experience implementing similar systems, your decision is lines of code. How many lines of code I used before to do something like this? That is the question.
Is it possible to receive a requirement which is functional and has non-functionality and has an activity?
And you need to split into.
Yeah,
yes. For instance, before someone asked me about this login, and you put login quickly. Really, that one is 2 requirements. Your functional is login, period. But this idea quickly, you are thinking about the customer is worried about performance. It's like this should move, Amazon should move quickly. The non-functional is performance is important. The non-functional is a performance requirement. I cannot use quickly. I need to use in Amazon. Every single web page should be displayed to the user in less than put the number. So something that is going to be non-functional and is going to be every single developer involved is, I do not know what do you do, but every single page should be shown in less than 1 second. Okay, I am going to ask for a new user, and the new user is going to ask for all this information. You know what? If you ask for all this information in one web page, it's not going to load in 1 second. Okay, split in 4 pages or 2 pages. And now we can guarantee that those 4 or 2 are going to load in less than 1 second. So you are taking care of the performance, the non-functional, while doing your functional. But the reason because you split in 4 is because you are helping the non-functional, not because the 4 pages, but the functional decisions. Make sense? Okay, moving forward, the number 4. Guys, yeah.
Like, nice. That's
That was exactly the thing that I was to comment. Thank you. So did everyone notice that really in the number 4, the requirement is I want to be able to roll a dice. Let me be clear. That is the title for the requirement. That title needs an explanation. The explanation is all the other things that I put there, right? Moreover, this idea of click, that is the trigger. It's not even an activity. We are going to talk about that later, but this click is the trigger, is what the user is going to do in order to trigger or to ask for the service or the functionality. This is not part of what the system is going to do. It's what the user is going to do to call the functionality. The functionality itself is to roll a dice. One thing that is an explanation here is that I need these dice to be 6 faces, because it can be something different, right? You can have more. Explanation, trigger, the requirement itself, roll the dice.
So is it okay to have just roll a dice as the requirement title, have figures and everything else? As the
Yes, your requirements are going to be, remember, the title, and I agree with that one, roll the dice. You are going to have this description. In the description, most of the things there. And one thing that we're going to put separated later for the description is the trigger. So right now, we haven't reviewed this template. We're going to move to that. But right now, I agree with what you give me. The title, the most important thing right now for me is we agree that the requirement is rolling the dice. More important, the actor is the user, the verb is rolling, and we can complete this with the dice. So we have the full information. Moreover, part of the description that we can put inside of the paragraph is that it's a 6-phase dice, to be specific. And we can take note of what later is going to be our trigger. We need to specify triggers for everything. In this case, the trigger is a click. That is the information that I have. Good. So the number 4 is a requirement. The number 3 is an activity. The number 2 is a requirement. The number 1 is 2 requirements. That is the big picture right now. Clear. Okay, all of them functional or non-functional. Can we read that all of them are services, behaviors, or functionalities? Good. Second part, more questions. 5, 6, 7, 8. Requirement, yes or no? Functional or non-functional? I will agree with that. Second one. I will agree with that. Next one.
All 4 are not. They're all non-functional.
Okay, good. If all the previous one was functional, makes sense that the professor put 4 that are not functional. It's a good way to guess. Good. Now, let me review every single one of them and why they are non-functional. You get the correct response, fine. Just let's go to the details, right? Because again, you can memorize this. It's like I chose 2 plus 2, and you can memorize 4, good. But I want you to notice why they are in that category. How do you identify that? And in particular, they are non-functional, yes, because they are talking about qualities. But they are requirements? That is a different question, right? When I ask if they are requirements, remember, we're talking about the invest letter. So all of them follow the invest thing, and that is the thing that we need to review. So 1, the system, user interface, mouse, drop that, blah, blah, blah. Number 1, the requirements, the title, the description, the document that I am going to ask you to do. 1 limitation, something that you should not do. Never, never, never mention in that document, in the title or in the description of your requirement, something that is technical. Do not mention things that you know because are developers, programmers, engineers, but think always about this is going to be understood by my stakeholders. This is something that someone outside of computer science or engineering is going to understand. Usually my requirement is do not mention libraries. Oh, I am going to use Java Swing. It's like, what is that for the common people? So be careful with that part, and that is something that I want to point out in general for functional and non-functional. Now, for the number 1, that will be clear for everyone. Think about someone outside of this classroom, high school, your family. I don't know, some people that you know that is not software engineering, computer science is going to understand if I talk about if you search, you can find someone or some scenario in which the answer is no. But again, think about the average people, right? It's like, do not be technical. Java Swing, for instance, or a name for a library or something, machine learning, backward propagation. Do not use those things. But generally, someone is going to understand the mouse, the keyboard, the bands, a user interface, text fields. And hopefully you agree with me, yes.
So you said that we should not be using it. What if my client, the one I'm working with, customer, is the one who hired me as a front-end developer, and their whole company will be using it. And therefore, for them, it matters a lot.
depending on the context. My global recommendation is don't do that, but in that particular context, you can do it. Is you similar when I mentioned before, do not use developer as the actor unless you are developing or the product that you are creating is a integrated developer environment. Because in that case, the developer is your user. So similar example here, if you have a context or a company, an environment in which it's very common to talk about Java Swing, put a JTEX box or particular libraries, it is fine. It is not going to be the case in this class. Just to be clear, I am not going to go in that direction. So something that for me is wrong. You do not put in a requirement something like use a JTEX field. Because what is a JTEX field? You can put use a text field. Text field is like, okay. But JTEX field, just to give you an example. So again, a context in which my customer is not technical. That is the common for the project unless particular situation. Good. So no technicalities, number one. I just want to ensure there are no technicalities there. JTEX field is a technicality, or JMenu, or swing, names of the libraries, names of classes. Those are technicalities, but drop-down box, keyboard event, text field like this, they are not technicalities. Another one. Use a listener or create a listener. You understand that a listener is this action perform method in Java, but that is a technicality. Is just capture the events of the mouse or capture the events of something. Event is something that is clear for everyone, even though do not have exactly the context of an object event, but it's something that someone can understand. Good. So number one can go well, is non-functional. Now, non-functional, help me. Non-functional should be qualities or constraints. Remember? Number one, is a quality or is a constraint? Remember something. If you tell me that it's a quality, then you can maybe found an adjective that describes that quality. Not always an adjective, but that is the direction. Quality or constraint? Okay, I do not have the adjective, I move to constraint. Now tell me what is the constraint? Because a constraint is a limitation, right? Something that you are kind of, limitation is?
Mouse at all.
What?
Use mouse at all.
Can you agree that I am asking for a graphical user interface in a kind of different way? Every single time that you ask for a graphical user interface, or even if you ask for a console interface, and you can do that in several different ways, using a particular interface, graphical, console, or web, or other, is going to be a constraint. But it's not a constraint, it's something to open the border. It's a constraint, period. Constraint, small constraint in big. Text-based interface is a constraint. Graphical user interface is a constraint. Web interface is a constraint, even though one is bigger than the other in terms of access. Constraint. The number one, non-functional, and so far non-technical. If I put any of them, it's wrong. It's technical. If it's technical, it's not negotiable. Did you notice how everything connects, right? The invest and so on. Good. The second one. I am going to mention that second one in quizzes, exams, and so on, and still maybe in your final exam, and sometimes people get it wrong. Java programming language. It's a requirement. Some people can tell me it's a technicality. If it's a non-functional, then it's a constraint or is a quality. Java programming language, quality or constraint?
Constraint.
Constraint. Sure. Yes, but I want you to think about this. If I am talking with my customer and my customer asks me to use Java, tell me, what will be the reason because the customer asked me to use a particular programming language, even maybe my customer is not someone from technical?
Since future mate was one that wanted that, thought that we want to have someone else doing it, get anyone else.
Reason number one, the customer is going to ask me to use Java because I am going to change a little bit the idea, but it's correct. I am thinking about maintenance in my company, and I am thinking that I have other engineers that know Java, and therefore I am asking the new one to also use Java. To be honest, I am not thinking about maintenance because Java or C or Python, they can be harder or easy to maintain the software. That is a different context. But what I am thinking is, I want compatibility with what I already have in my company. And that is the reason because I put this constraint. My developers, my company, my team, my product is already in this. And I have no idea what is that programming language, but what I want you to provide is this compatibility with the other things that I have. It's a constraint because that. Remember, my user, my customer, probably have no idea what is that, but have an idea that that was used before, and then he's going to ask you, and you need to identify like, why are you asking me to do this? Okay, because you already have other things in this, okay, no discussion, I need to do it. Another reason. Think about it's the first product that I asked you to do, so I do not have others. Maintenance, compatibility, backward do not apply. It's just first thing that I asked you to do, and I asked you to use Java. Why you learn Java in the first semester? What is the reason because people learn Java? Well, several reasons, but one, Java is connected with one particular word. Well, C++ is also object-oriented, but Java is, okay, let me change the word, portability. It's the same, right? But maybe what the customer is asking you to do is to create a piece of software that is portable, that is going to run in Mac and PCs because the portability of the language. So that is the reason because it's asking you to use Java, not C++ or other. Portability. And portability is an adjective, and portability is a quality, and therefore is a non-functional. What I mentioned to you is two reasons, constraint or quality, because asking for a particular language, for Java, is a non-functional requirement, and yes, it's a requirement. Good? The reason. 7. Two seconds, speed, quality, performance, non-functional, right? The only thing that you need to remember is, should be a number for the testing and estimation. 2 seconds, good, I am fine with that. Should not be used fast, right? The last one. It is a requirement when you mention, the customer mentioned to you some kind of law or a standard that you need to follow. Yes. Functional or non-functional? Non-functional. Constraint or quality? Constraint. Clear, guys? Right? Perfect. Now, next. In 5 minutes. Part number 3. Yeah.
Third,
point which you mentioned there is a quality for the organization or the product, but not, it's a constraint for the, I mean, you get the point, right? So,
Tell me more. Which one? The last one that I chose?
the third one. Yeah. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
I am asking for speed. I am asking for speed in something that the system do. And that speed, that requirement for something be done fast, that quality that I am asking for the system is that a quality is something that is a requirement. Is something that should be there in the system and follow all these ideas of valuable for the customer, something that cannot be done by one person, but something that should be considered by the full team. Because here I am talking about several different teams. It's not only the guy that developed the interface, but it's also the guy that is working with IT, the database, the connection, the network, and so on. So everyone should be aware that I need, or I am asking for that quality. It's not one developer. It's not functional. Good.
Wouldn't that be a constraint as well? It is a upper limit on what.
No, really doesn't matter. Like before with the Java programming, I just show you that could be considered Java programming a quality or a constraint. The point is, doesn't matter if it's quality or constraint, it's not functional. So my goal for you is that you identify them as one or the other. And if you reach the point in which can be both, it's going to be non-functional. But if it's not constrained and it's not quality, then it's not non-functional. And that is the point in which you need to think about something else, right? You need to redo things. That is my only point.
The last one you said.
The last one is a constraint.
Oh, I mean, it can be a feature for and quality.
Two things. Very good question. Guys, for instance, I am going to ask you to do a system like Canvas. And I am going to ask you that that system should follow third-party restrictions. This idea of your information as a student should be safe and should not be shared with anyone. That is a non-functional requirement just because it's this idea of I need to put limitations in terms of how the information is going to be shared. I need to document that as a non-functional because remember, it's something that I am going to put here in the whiteboard like, hey, remember FERPA, or remember ISO something, or remember law XXX. It's something that I need to put in the brain of every single people working in the project. Now, a very good point. Every single non-functional requirement, every one of them is going to put or is going to be connected with one or more functional requirements. Because this idea of FERPA or this idea of disabilities is going to be connected with things that are going to be services there. You need to follow this. Okay, that means that I need to make the system easy to use for this particular population. And that means that maybe for some functionalities, such as capturing data, I need to implement not one, but two different ways to capture data. So there are going to be functionals that are going to be a consequence of identifying non-functionals. That is going to happen, yes, but the point is they are two different things. The non-functional exist, and the functionals, one or more, are going to exist connected with this one.
Shall be accessible only to people with disabilities. Then will it be a quality? In that case, we are only looking at one specific group.
The last one?
Yeah, the system shall be accessible only to people. In that case, we are only focusing at a specific group.
Both things are the same. Both things can be non-functional. Even if I ask only for, or if I ask for, should be able to access for that population and others, it doesn't matter. The thing is, you need to consider this particular law or this particular rule or population or whatever. It can be only for them or for them and for others. In this case, it's for them and for others. So both cases are constraints. Both cases are non-functional. It's similar idea to the one that I mentioned before. The constraint can be text-based interface or graphical user interface or web interface. It's like, doesn't matter that this one is bigger and this one is small, but they are constrained, quotation mark constraint. Okay, guys, I am going to stop here. Therefore, I am not going to ask you to do more homework. The homework is going to be next week. Good? So have a good weekend.